Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Is this the Battle of the Bulge, or is this before?
By July...
Let's learn. Hey guys, how the Allies trapped the Germans. Imperial War Museum's original link to the video, top the description. Let's go.
1944, the Allies were in trouble. By July 1944, the Allies were in trouble. Since D-Day, they had advanced just 30 kilometers in 3 weeks, as the fight to break out of Normandy became one of the most savage battles of the Second World War. In the deadly maze of hedgerows, the next town, let alone Berlin, seemed to be a million miles away. And yet, just a month later, the Allies transformed the battle. They punched through the German lines and sealed their enemy in a giant cauldron known as the Falaise Pocket. It marked the brutal and decisive finale of the Normandy campaign.
Okay, this is before the Battle of the Bulge.
So why did the Allies get stuck in the first place? What sparked the breakthrough? And did the Allies miss a golden opportunity for an even more stunning victory? 6 days after D-Day, the Allies finally linked their beaches together with the capture of Carentan. As they advanced, a 7-mile gap opened in the German line, and the next day, British tanks surged forward to exploit it. But as they advanced along a narrow road, a lone Tiger tank emerged seemingly from nowhere. Its commander, Michael Vitman, destroyed 10 tanks and 18 personnel carriers in just a few minutes.
Jesus.
Thanks in part to his efforts, the British attack came to a halt soon after.
Were British tanks just that much better than the Allies?
The Allies' chance for...
Alright, sorry.
His efforts, the British attack came to a halt soon after. The Allies' chance for a quick breakout in Normandy was gone. For Allied Ground Forces commander Bernard Montgomery, this was a serious setback. Montgomery had promised his fellow commanders at Schaeff that the campaign in Normandy would take around 3 months, after which he expected the German forces to withdraw to defensive positions on the River Seine. To maintain that timetable, he had to capture 2 crucial cities. In the west, American troops aimed to cut the Cotentin Peninsula and capture Cherbourg, the only deep-water port in the area. However, their part of the front was covered in thick hedgerows known...
So, the deep-water port, just an area where your largest ships could go right up to the land, where they'd have to have landing craft on coasts like this?
As Boccaria. However, their part of the front was covered in thick hedgerows known as bocage, which were a defender's paradise. In the east, British and Canadian forces targeted Caen, a road and rail hub that had been an objective for D-Day itself. Unlike the American sector though, the terrain around Caen was an open plain with little to no cover. To make things more difficult, the British forces also faced political pressure.
By 1944, Britain was running out of men. The campaigns in the Mediterranean, East Asia, at sea and in the air had drained her manpower reserves, and there would be few replacements available for the fighting in Normandy.
Sorry.
It was vital for political reasons and morale back home that Britain preserved enough strength to win the war and influence the post-war settlement. All too aware.
You know, when he says, the hedgerows or a defender's stream, and you think, other than just obscuring line of sight, what is a hedge going to do in the face of armored divisions and whatnot? But I've driven through this area, and these are serious hedges. They are not just your little neighborhood bushes. They're like thick walls of just foliage. Sticks.
Montgomery centered his approach on tanks rather than infantry. As his chief intelligence officer put it, let metal do it rather than flesh. This Sherman tank, which operated with the Guards Armoured Division, was typical of the Allied tanks employed in the Normandy campaign. The Sherman frequently required multiple hits to halt or destroy a Tiger or Panther tank. The big problem was the tank needed to work alongside infantry to be effective. In the patchwork terrain of small fields, sunken lanes, streams and dense hedgerows, Allied tanks became easy prey.
Wary of losses, Montgomery decided against a frontal assault on Caen. Instead, British and Canadian forces under Miles Dempsey planned to encircle Caen in Operation Epsom. But beginning on the 19th of June, a great storm in the Channel delayed the attack and wrecked Allied supply lines. By the time Dempsey got going on the 26th, German reinforcements had arrived from the Eastern Front. The rains had turned the battlefield into a quagmire and robbed the Allied forces of their air support. Costly fighting ensued, but little ground was made. Dempsey then had to...
Was that dynamite? What is he carrying there? I doubt anyone would be able to identify it just from this,
Costly
but...
fighting ensued, but little ground was made. Dempsey then had to brace for a German counterattack, which began on the 29th. But the Panzer divisions were committed piecemeal, and improving weather allowed Allied air power to play its part alongside naval guns and artillery. By the 1st of July, the battle was over, with neither side victorious. Though Epsom had failed to achieve many of its objectives, it did have a powerful effect on the German commanders. Army Group B's Erwin Rommel and OB West's Gerd von Rundstedt had been forced to commit all their forces just to hold the line. It was now clear that the Allies could not be thrown back into the sea. In a meeting with Hitler, Rommel and von Rundstedt laid out their choices: withdraw or risk destruction. But they did not get the answer that they wanted.
Hitler forbade retreat. He told Rommel and von Rundstedt, "We must not allow mobile warfare to develop. Since the enemy surpasses us in mobility, everything depends upon us confining him to his bridgehead, and then on fighting a war of attrition to wear him down and force him back. This is the weapon that would come to
I'd expect his generals to know more, but that sort of had some logic behind it. Do you think that was logical or no? Just saying like, it's either you stop him here or you don't stop him at all. So what's the point of retreating in this case if that just means ultimate defeat? But it's clearly his generals didn't want that answer, and they probably know more than he does. So
symbolise that attritional fighting, the naval there. This is the weapon that would come to symbolise that attritional fighting, the naval Werfer, a multi-barreled rocket launcher. In the first 7 weeks of the campaign, approximately 70% of British and Canadian casualties were caused by German mortars and naval Werfers. The droning noise which heralded the rockets caused fear and terror amongst the Allied troops.
I was just about to say, what are these? Blah, blah, blah. The Soviet trucks with all of those missiles behind them. That was a World War II thing too, right? As well. And I was going to say the sound of those, but I was mixing it up with this sound. So it was the Germans who had those scary sounding rocket launchers.
Ordered the rockets caused fear and terror amongst the Allied troops, who nicknamed them moaning minis or screaming memes.
At the same time as Dempsey's attacks, American forces under Omar Bradley were experiencing more success. On the 18th of June, they managed to cut the Cotentin Peninsula, isolating Cherbourg. With limited German forces in front of them, they began assaulting the city on the 22nd. Tough house-to-house fighting ensued, but with support from Allied warships off the coast, Cherbourg was in Allied hands by the 27th of June. However, as one American engineer put it, the port itself had seen the best planned demolition job in history. Repairing it would take time. As June ended, it was clear to the Allies that things were not going to plan. Apart from the capture of Cherbourg, they had advanced little since linking up the beaches on June 12th. This was primarily due to poor weather, difficult terrain, and stiffer than expected German resistance. Though his forces now numbered over 1 million troops and 170,000 vehicles, Montgomery didn't have enough space to utilise his advantage in mobility. Because of this, many at Scharfe were becoming increasingly impatient and critical of Montgomery.
However, Montgomery was still certain he was winning the battle. Thanks to ultra intercepts, Montgomery knew that the German forces were sustaining heavy casualties, and, unlike the Allies, these losses were not being replaced. Hamstrung by Hitler's stand-fast orders, the German forces were locked into a battle of attrition they could not hope to win. Montgomery chose to take advantage. The British Second Army would function as a lure, drawing the concentration of German armoured divisions towards the east around Caen, thus enabling the American First Army to break out in the west.
In early July, von Rundstedt was replaced as German commander by Günther von Kluge after Rundstedt reportedly confessed that the war was lost. He wasn't far off the mark. German forces were in headlong retreat in the east thanks to...
Look at those scars. What is it with so many Germans having scars on their faces?
Rundstedt
in World War II? Or am I just imagining things? Do they just make all the villains in American cinema have Germans with scars on their face, and so I'm imagining things? But
that the war was lost. He wasn't far off the mark. German forces were in headlong retreat in the east thanks to Operation Bagration, and though V-1 flying bombs were now falling on Britain by the thousand, these were not the war-winning weapons that Hitler had claimed them to be. Shortly afterwards, Rommel was injured in a strafing attack, and von Kluge assumed his responsibilities as well. Initially hopeful about his prospects, von Kluge soon reached the same grim conclusions as his predecessors. Nevertheless, he would carry out Hitler's orders and ensure that the Allies paid dearly for every foot of ground. After failing to encircle the city, Montgomery concluded that a more concentrated attack would be required to capture Caen. This was exactly the battle he had hoped not to fight. Dempsey's attack, codenamed Operation Charwood, was preceded by a major bombardment from Allied heavy bombers, which reduced Caen to ruins. The bombing not only killed numerous civilians, but it had little effect on the defenders. When the attack began on the 8th of July, the British and Canadian forces took heavy casualties against increasingly exhausted German defenders. By the evening of the 9th, the northern half of Caen was finally in Allied hands, but the rubble-strewn streets and the losses incurred prevented them from exploiting their success. Meanwhile, in the west, Bradley's forces now targeted the road hub of Saint-Lô. Attacking through the worst of the hedgerows, the rate of advance was painfully slow. As Glover Johns of the 29th Infantry Division recounted, thus goes the battle. A rush, a pause, some creeping, a few isolated shots, some artillery fire, some mortars, some smoke, more creeping, another pause, dead silence, more firing, a great concentration of fire followed by a concerted rush. Then the whole process starts over again. It took the Americans 2 weeks just to get in sight of their objective. On the 18th of July, Saint-Lô finally fell into Allied hands, and 95% of the city had been destroyed in the fighting. That same day, Dempsey launched his most ambitious attack so far, Operation Goodwood. Preceded by another huge bombardment by more than 2,000 aircraft, the operation aimed to capture the high ground south of Caen. The British and Canadian forces found initial success, and Allied tanks charged ahead.
that's terrifying.
Canadian forces found initial success, and Allied
Why does a tank flamethrower seem even scarier than just a regular tank?
tanks charged ahead. However, the German defences were of such a depth that by the afternoon, the attack was already becoming...
Guys, so that's not just spewing fire out, right?
Found
Like,
initial success, and
this is like sticky fire liquid, right? Like, it's not like it's just a torch, right? It's actually like a napalm type
Allied
substance.
tanks
Is that
charged
right?
ahead. However, the German defences were of such a depth that by the afternoon, the attack was already becoming bogged down. By the 20th of July, Goodwood was over. The reaction at Schaeff was one of fury and dismay, primarily due to the number of tanks damaged, over 400 in a single day. But once again, Montgomery felt as if he had won a strategic victory. Dempsey's forces had successfully tied down 7 German panzer divisions with over 600 tanks. There were just 2 facing Bradley, with less than 200 tanks between them. The Americans were set to take full advantage in Operation Cobra.
Operation Cobra was preceded by an immense aerial bombardment that destroyed German armour and killed many of the infantry housed in defensive positions. 7 weeks after D-Day, many of the Allied troops were combat experienced and less prone to making mistakes. Innovation also played a part in the American success. A lieutenant and a sergeant demonstrated that refashioned steel beach defences could be welded to the front of a Sherman tank and used to uproot the hedgerows. Tanks fitted with the device that resembled an array of horns were nicknamed Rhinos. The success of the American breakthrough caused widespread confusion amongst the Germans, with a retreat becoming a rout.
The German defences at Saint-Lô were comparatively shallow, and any reserves to counter a breakthrough had already been sucked in to defend Caen. After breaking through the first line, the Americans advanced rapidly, taking Coutances on the 28th and Avranches a few days later. The attritional fighting of the Bocage was over. Mobile warfare was back. George Patton's newly activated US Third Army now broke out into Brittany, while Dempsey and Harry Crerar's newly activated 1st Canadian Army attempted to tie down as many German forces as possible in Operation Bluecoat. The German
That's a
position
big encirclement.
seemed untenable, but not to Adolf Hitler. It was in this scenario that he wanted to attack. Hitler envisaged a drive through Mortain towards Avranches, which would cut off Patton's forces. Few German commanders believed in the plan, but having survived an assassination attempt the month before, Hitler's stranglehold over the German armed forces
Oh, he's
was
just
now total.
nuts.
The order had to be obeyed.
On the night of the 6th to
And if you don't have the sufficient numbers and reinforcements, if you push through and you know that they're just getting more and more men here and here, aren't you just opening yourself up to be instead of being encircled here, you're going to be encircled here? Actually, wait. You don't want them. You're trying to stop them from going under you, so maybe that's not that bad of an idea.
Which would cut off Patton's forces. Few German commanders believed in the plan, but having survived an assassination attempt the month before, Hitler's stranglehold over the German armed forces was now total. The order had to be obeyed.
On the night of the 6th to 7th of August, 4 panzer divisions broke forth and met with initial success. By daylight, leading elements of the attack had Avranches within reach. However, the Allied troops defending the town fought tenaciously. An American battalion, which had been surrounded on a hill east of Mortain, called in heavy and accurate artillery fire on the attackers. While an attack by RAF Typhoon aircraft firing rockets, though not with consistent accuracy, had an unnerving effect on the German troops. By that evening, Kluge learned that fewer than half the tanks that began the attack were still operating, and he concluded the attack had failed. But Hitler ordered that the attack be prosecuted daringly and recklessly to the sea, regardless of the risk. The German units were in effect facilitating their own encirclement, attacking into the jaws of the Allied pincers that now threatened to surround them.
By the 8th, Patton's forces had taken Le Mans and were heading north towards Alençon, while Canadian forces were pushing...
as soon as they're under you, then what's the point in cutting them off here? Yeah, like he said, you're just kind of aiding him,
Patton's forces had taken
going further into the mouth.
Le Mans and were heading north towards Alençon, while Canadian forces were pushing on from Caen towards Falaise. Then, on the 15th, Allied forces landed in southern France in Operation Dragoon. Hitler would later call this the worst day of his life. He relieved von Kluge of command and ordered a full-scale retreat, but it was far too late. All the Allies had to do was close the pocket, and an entire German army could be annihilated in the cauldron. It was a golden opportunity, but the Allies would fail to capitalise. The reasons for this failure are still a matter of debate, mainly over the town of Argenton. Patton had advanced quickly on the town, but his forces were stretched. With a sizable German presence in the area, Montgomery had believed that the Canadians would be able to reach it first and place the city in the Canadian operational zone. But when they instead got bogged down in the ruins of Falaise, Patton was refused permission to attack Argentan himself. In the meantime, tens of thousands of German troops escaped through the 10-mile gap between them. Eventually, on the 19th of August, American and Polish units linked up near the town of Chambois, but they were in for the fight of their lives to hold the pocket closed and trap the German forces.
Two battle groups of the Polish 1st Armoured Division had taken the northern peak of Mont-Ormel Ridge, a blocking position overlooking the German forces' final escape route.
Imagine the feeling as a Polish soldier, surrounding and capturing the German troops after they, took over your country. It'd been, same goes for the French, any French soldiers.
Position overlooking the German forces' final escape route. The Germans, in the gradually closing pocket, fought desperately to keep their escape route open. The attack was repulsed. The Polish defenders held on to their positions. When darkness fell, the Germans began moving east on roads clogged with wreckage, passing through burning villages whilst trying to maintain cohesion and discipline. The following morning, when the fog lifted, the Poles on Mont-Ormel saw the plain crawling with German columns. Artillery pulverised the moving mass, but light rain, which became a downpour, kept Allied aircraft on the ground. Exhausted and low on ammunition, the Poles were finally relieved by Canadian forces on the 21st of August.
In the end, while around
What's the problem with it raining for the aircraft? Was it because it was just stormy weather in general, or just is rain alone enough to make it so the airplanes can't function in the sky or something?
50,000 Germans escaped the pocket. Another 60,000 were either killed or taken prisoner inside it by the 22nd of August. Touring the ground after the battle, Eisenhower said that the scene could be described only by Dante. It was literally possible to walk for hundreds of yards at a time, stepping on nothing but dead and decaying flesh. On the 25th of August, Paris was liberated, and by the end of the month, the Germans had withdrawn to the Seine, exactly as predicted, 3 months after D-Day. And with that, Operation Overlord was over. For the people of Normandy, their liberation proved to be both a source of triumph and devastation. The conclusion of 4 years of Nazi rule brought freedom, but at the tragic cost of over 20,000 civilian deaths and the displacement of hundreds of thousands more. The Allies had suffered just over 200,000 casualties over the course of the campaign.
It was almost the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Paris, huh? In a few days. Sorry, let me go back a few days.
Triumph and devastation. The conclusion of 4 years of Nazi rule brought freedom, but at the tragic cost of over 20,000 civilian deaths and the displacement of hundreds of thousands more. The Allies had suffered just over 200,000 casualties over the course of the campaign, while the Germans had suffered close to 300,000 killed, wounded or captured.
The campaign in Normandy was not the one the Allies had expected to fight. The casualty rates, caused by the nature of the terrain and the tenacity of the German defence, were comparable to those of the First World War. However, the Germans had suffered terribly too, both before and after the closing of Falaise Pocket. In combination with the Soviet Operation Bagration, the German army had been dealt a death blow. But for all their success...
I'd much rather... obviously, it would suck to be a soldier in an army and getting captured. But I'd much rather be captured in the West than by the Soviets.
To the closing of Falaise Pocket. In combination with the Soviet Operation Bagration, the German army had been dealt a death blow. But for all their success, the advance into Germany wouldn't be an easy one. Subsequently, the Allied advance would falter because of the absence of a functioning port. Every replacement soldier and all the material of war had to be hauled from the Normandy beaches. Germany had suffered a defeat, but the war was far from over.
I mean, yeah, the Battle of the Bulge is coming up, right? Interesting video. Definitely, I didn't know the extent. A lot of this stuff I kind of guess learned from Band of Brothers, and it doesn't, watching a TV show doesn't give you the idea of just the how long it took, like a history video can, obviously. And I didn't know it was as much of a struggle as it was. Very interesting. Love y'all. Would appreciate any comments down below, answering any questions I might have had, correcting me, or any comments at all. You guys are great with that. And hopefully I'll see you next video. Bye, guys.